And welcome back to another Dahlberg Music TV production. Been just pumping out this Kurt Cobain content like crazy. I'm trying to do 2 books again, as I just finished 2 books a couple days ago. Trying to get these books that I rented from the library knocked out, and then I'm gonna go back and try to see if I can't find some stuff on some shipwreck stuff, maybe. Serving the Servant. Remembering Kurt Cobain by Danny Goldberg. Cameron Crowe even gave a weird little... I can't even read it because they put the library thing on the way, but looking at the back here. Serving the Servant. Advanced praise for insightful, passionate, clear-eyed Goldberg's account on his personal and professional relationship with Kurt Cobain is required reading. This is essentially the story of 2 men, a generation apart, but the unexpected friends and contemplative requiem to losing someone you love is immeasurably touched by the entire planet with the singular magic, thirst and more of sonic youth. People always ask, what was Kurt really like? That's probably not the question that any other one person can answer about anybody, but anybody who knew him will tell you that this book sends you vividly back to that person, and in that time, those places. Serving the Servant contributes to an invaluable piece of contemplated collage. A complicated collage. Michael Azerrad, author of Come As You Are. See, now that's another thing I want to get my hands on, is Come As You Are. That will be one of the books that I will try to buy along with Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, because I've had a hell of a time trying to get that book from a library. I don't know why, but it's a popular book and people like to steal. A clear and straightforward look into a gifted artist's struggle to a balance of integrity and ambition. There's been a lot of mythologizing and its deification of Cobain, but Goldberg humanizes him. Juliana Hatfield. A deeply honest book that provides a crucial insight in the brilliant life and the death that broke all our hearts. Ann Powers, author of The Good Booty. Goldberg's portrait of Cobain is loving, intimate, and 3-dimensional. We feel that Cobain's loss in a new, palpably, as we do the inevitable power of the greatest gift, his music. Anthony D. Curtis, author of Lou Reed. I couldn't put it down. Any music fan should want this book. Any Nirvana fan must have this book. Joan Jett of the Blackhearts. As a fan, one-time rock journalist, Danny Goldberg treasures Kurt Cobain as an artist. As Nirvana's manager, he witnessed the ambition and the empathy that drove Cobain towards stardom. As an activist, he admires Cobain's courageously explicit politics, and as Cobain's shrewd advisor and fond friend, he missed him, even more acutely than the rest of us. Robert Christgau, author of Is It Still Good to You? Weird. Okay, opening up to the first inside linear notes here on the inside sleeve. On the 25th anniversary of Kurt Cobain's death comes a new perspective on one of the most compelling icons of its time. In early 1991, music manager Danny Goldberg agreed to take Nirvana's critically acclaimed new band from the underground music scene in Seattle. He had no idea the band's leader, Kurt Cobain, would become a pop culture icon with a legacy arguably the level of John Lennon, Michael Jackson, or Elvis Presley. Danny worked with Kurt from 1990 to 1994. The last 4 years of his life, the events of which resonated around the world. He witnessed the stratospheric success of Nevermind, which turned Nirvana into the most successful rock band in the world and made punk and grunge household terms. Kurt's meeting and marriage to the brilliant and merciful Courtney Love, how the relationship became a lightning rod for critics, the birth of their daughter Frances Bean, and finally Kurt's public struggles with addiction, which ended with a devastating suicide. This would alter the course of rock history throughout. Danny stood by Kurt's side as his manager and close friend. Okay, Danny. Don't tell me you're going to be pushing the suicide narrative too. This is going to be fucking disgusting if it is. Drawing on... I'm not going to be a bad critic right out the chute, but just... cool your jets, Danny. Drawing on Danny's own memories of Kurt, files that previously have not been made public, interviews among others, and Kurt's close friends and family and former bandmates. Serving the Servant sheds an entirely new light on these critical years, casting aside the common obsession with angst and the depression seemingly drove Kurt's Serving the Servants in an exploration of his brilliance, his every aspect of rock and roll, and his compassion and his ambition and the legacy that he wrought, and one has lasted decades longer than his career did. Danny Goldberg examines what is Kurt Cobain that still resonates today, even with the generation who wasn't alive until after Kurt's death. And in this process, he provides the portrait of an icon unlike any other that has come before. So who is Danny Goldberg? Danny Goldberg is the president and owner of Gold Village Entertainment, an artist management company, former CEO and founder of Gold Mountain Entertainment, and former president of both Mercury Records and Atlantic Records, former CEO of Air America, and the frequent contributor to the Los Angeles Times, The Nation, the Huffington Post, Dissent, Billboard, and many other outlets. He is the author of In Search of a Lost Chord, Bumping into the Geniuses, and How Long the Left Lost Teen Spirit, and co-editor of It's a Free Country. He lives in Pound Ridge, New York. Available from Free Harper and Harper College ebooks. So there's an audiobook of this out there already, but I'm going to give it to you guys free on YouTube. You ain't got to go to Audible or none of that crap. Pay a month for nothing. I'll give it to you as best I can. And if I find a word that stumps me, I will stop and listen to Google and learn how to pronounce it as best I can. I try not to let that stuff stump me. Serving the Service is copyrighted 2019, so it looks like it was wrote then. For my brother Peter, sister Rachel, and our parents, Victor and Mimi Goldberg, who love books, records, and their children. Holy crap, looks like we got 17 chapters. So we're going to start with the introduction. Yeah. And then we're going to be going into chapter 1. It looks like we got the good old introduction to start with. One afternoon in the fall of 2011, during the brief flowering of Occupy Wall Street, I visited Ground Zero of the moment, the Zuccotti Park. As I was leaving, a short tattooed teenage boy with a pierced eyebrow shyly asked me if I would take a picture with him. Celebrities were often visiting the encampment in those days, and I said I was pretty sure that he had me mixed up with someone else. But the boy shook his head and he answered, "No, I know who you are. You used to work with Kurt Cobain." I couldn't help but wonder if he had even been alive when Kurt killed himself 17 years earlier. Fuck you, Danny Goldberg. Why you gotta say that right out the chute? Why do we gotta keep bringing up the suicide crap? I couldn't help but wonder if he had been alive when Kurt killed himself 17 years earlier. What was it about Kurt's music that endangered long enough to get through to him? Every one of us who worked with Kurt had these kind of experiences with fans from time to time. It's as if encountering someone who knew Kurt gets closer to him in spirit, and that makes them feel less alone. Not everything about Kurt's legacy is tender, though. In death, as if in life, he is full of contradictions. When I started writing this book, I typed the name Kurt Cobain into the search. The search box on Amazon. In addition to posters, guitar picks, books, vinyl, videos, and t-shirts, and there were the dark olive lenses that Kurt Cobain inspired, Nirvana sunglasses, a Kurt Cobain fleece throw blanket, a Kurt Cobain pocket lighter, a fascist smile of Kurt Cobain Washington State driver's license, a stainless steel pill box with pictures of Kurt playing the guitar on it, and Kurt Cobain unplugged action figure. My favorite is the bumper sticker that reads, "I'm not talking to myself, I'm talking to Kurt Cobain." If there was one that said he was speaking to me, I would definitely have ordered it. If there was one that said he was speaking to me, I would definitely have ordered it. I embark on this project knowing that Kurt is a compulsive reader of his own press. He complained about rock writers who wanted to psychoanalyze him and resented it when they described his art as if they were merely a refracted commentary on his personal life. But he did hundreds of interviews to help him refine the image that he wanted to project. His artistic legacy and tragic suicide created a persona and the functions that light the Rozak. I mean, I should just start saying that it's tragic murder. Maybe I should just start switching that instead of saying suicide. And that would just, at least I'm saying it right, instead of saying it wrong all the damn time. Many who knew emphasized those aspects of his life that reinforced a particular notion of who they think he was. I am no exception. I owe much of my career to him and was one of his managers and a friend. In my office, I often store at a framed photo of the two of us in which there was a sparkle in his eyes, the essence of which I keep trying to remember. The memory thing isn't an issue. I've forgotten a lot of details. Just as I was about to get in touch with Courtney Love to help me with my recollection, I heard from her because she wanted the same kind of help from me for her memoir. 25 years is a long time. None of us are getting any younger. And for me, one of the biggest issues is that sometimes it's hard for me to tell where the public history ends and where the personal memory begins. So many of the facts of Kurt's life have been documented in books, movies, YouTube clips, box sets, articles, and the internet, which barely existed during Kurt's life, has the sites with set lists and everything from the show that Nirvana played, and in many cases with the transcripts of the band's on-stage banter between songs. I've been able to also reconstruct some of the events of my files, and have been able to help enormously by talking to others whom I knew I worked with Kurt. I found that many people with whom I reconnected had both large gaps in their memory and also had a few vivid hardwired recollections that they have retained for years, relics of both Kurt's life and their own. Similarly, some periods of my own memory are vague, an impressionistic mush, but I have almost a cinematic clarity for a handful of moments. However, some of these stories have been semi-mythical after the years of retellings, and I have found numerous instances where one person's cherished anecdote clashed with mine, or another's. And in addition to the effect that he had on millions of fans, Kurt deeply touched hundreds of people personally in his short life, and even after a quarter of a century, bitter feelings lingered between some of those who were close to him in the early of his career, and those like me who worked with him later, and between those who have negative feelings about Courtney and those like me who are fond of her. Most of the people I encountered when I worked with Kurt in Nirvana were eager to share their memories, but a few were not, because even after all this time, their feelings about his life and death were still so raw. I understand that those who want to stay quiet, and for those first couple of decades after his suicide, I avoided books and film about Kurt. Recently, I binged on most of them. Several accounts focus on his parents' divorce and his subsequent unhappy childhood and his tenacious struggle for recognition as a musician in the Northwest during the late 1980s. Kurt did tell me at various times about his sense of abandonment by his parents and the sense of isolation he felt as a kid, but I have little to add to that. Historical record of his life, and I didn't seek other people whom I didn't know from my work with Kurt. He and I didn't enter each other's lives until shortly before Nirvana started to work on Nevermind, the album that made them international phenomenon. And when it was released in September 1991, this subjective description of the time I was connected to him, the last 3.5 years of his life, when Kurt Cobain did the work he was most remembered for. I viewed his artistry as being far more than a collection of Nirvana's greatest hits, and believe that he belongs on the highest tier of rock and roll hierarchy. He was also a generous to other musicians, and thoughtful about his role as a public figure. On a personal level, he was kind to me both tangibly and in ways I cannot express. Many of those who were closest to Kurt remain furious at him for killing himself. I respect their feelings, but that's not where I'm coming from. I miss him, and I always wonder if there is something that I could have done to prevent his early death. Yet as far as I can tell, neither medical science nor spiritual traditions nor great philosophers understand why some people take their own lives and others do not. Yeah, well, maybe you should look into the fucking murder theory before you just start fucking going that direction, Danny. Actually fucking care about your friend and care about how he died instead of just dismissing it because Courtney told you some stupid shit. And as I have worked my way through the bittersweet process of remembering his life and the art, the story that I've increasingly been telling myself, and that is his suicide was not the moral failing, but the result of mental illness, and neither does he or anyone around him was able to successfully treat or cure. I do not use the word illness the way that a doctor would, but as a stand-in for a force that I believe was beyond anyone's control. Danny, you're fucking full of shit. I did not play music with Kurt. or share his deep connection to punk rock culture, and nor did I take drugs with him. However, I worked with him on the principle of creating the project of his life, a body of work that reinvented rock and roll in a global popular culture, and for many of his fans redefined the masculinity as well. Despite the squalor of his own low points and the grotesque reality of his death, mine is largely a romantic view of Kurt's creative and idealistic sides. One of at least on occasion in the past, those impulses to focus on his positive legacy was tone deaf to grief and other of his friends experienced. I gave the final eulogy at a private funeral that Courtney pulled together after his body was found. In Nirvana, a biography, a British rock journalist, Everett True, described his reaction to it. Danny Goldberg had given a speech, described in his reaction to it at Kurt's funeral service, that had made me realize precisely why the singer had finally given up. This speech had no grounding in reality, no relation to any man I've known. In it, Kurt was referred to as an angel that came to earth in human form, and as someone who was too good for this life, and that was why he was only here for such a short time. Bull fucking shit. Kurt was as pissy and moody and belligerent and naughty and funny and dull as the rest of us. No fucking shit. That was actually wrote in there. I didn't have to add that there. It was kind of cool that was in there. Sounds like I just made that shit up, but it was actually word for word. Not long after his book was published, at a music business conference in Australia, Everett and I spent time together and found that we had a lot more in common than either one of us expected. And when it came to our feelings about Kurt, even so, as I knew Everett's negative reaction to my eulogy was shared by several others. As I see it, various perspectives each contain part of the truth. Kurt had splits in his personality, and he was a depressive junkie and a creative genius. He could be bitterly sarcastic or despairing, but he also had a deeply romantic streak in confidence and excellence of his art. Kurt also was a slob and maintained a goofy sense of humor. He liked the same junk food that he ate as a kid, and he liked to wear pajamas during the day. Yet his slacker affect often has been obscured as highly a sophisticated intellect. Mark Cates, who was one of the Geffen record executives and closest to Kurt, spoke for many when he told me in a voice choked with emotion two things that are often forgotten about Kurt. And first, that he was very funny, and second, that he was incredibly smart. Kurt had the contempt for those that who disrespected him, and he could not be grumpy and unpleasant when he was in pain, but most of the time that he exuded a graciousness and a rare genius toward the stars. He was, dare I say it, a nice guy most of the time. The photo of Kurt and me I kept looking at, taken on March 6, 1992 at a concert by two of his favorite bands, Mudhoney and Eugenius, at the Palace in Los Angeles. Nirvana's breakthrough album Nevermind had come out the previous September, and in the ensuing 5.5 months, the band had experienced one of the most meteoric explosions of popularity in musical history. They had a uniquely combined the punk rock energy and the anti-establishment ethos of the Sex Pistols with the pop melodies, and at the moment when that was exactly what much of the global rock audience wanted. Kurt tended to be the self-deprecating in interviews, and he would often compare the pop side of his songwriting to the Bay City Rollers, the Knack, or the Cheap Trick, but I also think that he was also emulating the Beatles. And in the weeks since the album's initial single, Smells Like Teen Spirit, had first played on the radio, there had been a surreal and abrupt transition between the band's austere punk rock origins and the new reality. They traveled in airplanes instead of vans, and had slept in hotels instead of friends' couches, and most strangers who looked at them now saw them as celebrities rather than derelicts. 20 years earlier, Bruce Springsteen had become famous quickly when Born to Run got him on the cover of Time and Newsweek, but even as the boss had to wait several more years till The River to have a pop hit and a number one album. For Nirvana, critical acclaim and pop success happened all at once, and the phenomenon was more remarkable because they had emerged from the insular world of punk rock, which up until that moment had faced an indifference from American rock fans. Musicians had more of an individual cultural power than artists, except for a handful of auteurs, actors are dependent on other people's scripts, and even the biggest movie stars, novelists, and painters can meet their audience in adoring groups of thousands on a nightly basis, or get their fans' heads every day the way a hit song does. Hence the power of a phrase, rock star. Because he was the rare rock star who stood out for something more than sex appeal or entertainment, Kurt was viewed by many journalists and fans as a savant, and it was a mindfuck. But it had compensations. He was proud of what the band had accomplished, and it was a relief for the first time in his life that he had enough money to live comfortably. This particular night, Kurt was enjoying being a mere fan again. Mudhoney was one of his favorite Seattle bands, and he was friends with their lead singer, Mark Arm. Kurt also had befriended Eugene Kelly of Eugenius, originally called Captain America before Marvel Comics forced them to jettison the name. Kelly had written Molly's Lips, a song that Nirvana covered on an early single for Kurt's previous group, the Vaselines. A year earlier, Kurt had looked up to Arm and Kelly, but now he was like their most successful younger brother, Mug, unanimously cheering them on. Despite the powerful impact of MTV, which played Nirvana's videos several times a day, Kurt wasn't hassled by the members of the crowd. Perhaps it was at least 5 feet 8 inches tall and slightly hunched over from scoliosis. He blended into the background, or because he just dressed the same as he had when he was broke, in torn jeans and Converse sneakers, or he had no entourage or security hovering around him. However, I suspect that a number of fans that night did recognize Kurt, but knew he had rather be left alone to enjoy the music along with them. Kurt had recently gotten out of rehab, and as far as I could tell, he was clean. His eyes were clear, dramatic contrast to the depressing, opaque heroin gaze I had first seen when Nirvana performed on Saturday Night Live a couple months earlier. Kurt and Courtney had both gone into treatment, and it seemed to have worked. I swear that for a moment he was happy. During a break in the show, we were standing in an uncrowded corners of a balcony where people with passes could go, and Kurt spotted a photographer and put his arm over my shoulder and said with a warm grin, "Let's take a picture," as if he knew it was a moment that I'd wait to remember. Courtney is several months pregnant, and she and Kurt had just moved into a new apartment in Alta Loma Terrace in the Hollywood Hills. At the last minute, Kurt decided to host a party at his new place after the concert. He was playing with the idea of being a grown-up, and for a moment of getting off on it. The apartment was hard to find. It was barely visible from the road, in a weird structure that required an outside tram to get to the front door. It was a time before most people had GPS, and Kurt hadn't given out the driving directions, so very few people showed up. But the vibe was great anyway. It was such a relief to see Kurt and Courtney feeling good about themselves for a moment, the oasis of peace that was not very long. The following week, Courtney had been a series of interviews with Lynn Hirschberg for a profile in Vanity Fair that would come out to torment the couple when it was published several months later, and had to reverberate negatively for years to come. I was 40 years old when I met Kurt Cobain, and he was 23. If he and I were still alive, we'd both be middle-aged guys today. But at that time, I was old, and he was young, and Kurt was still at the stage of the rock career when most songs are about how you felt as a teenager. I was a jaded veteran of 20 years in the rock and roll business. I had a kid, a mortgage, and a corporate job. The year before, I had the career peak when I had been thanked at the Grammys by Bonnie Raitt after she won an Album of the Year. Kurt's persona had been forged in the anti-establishment world of the Northwest punk rock, a culture that had no contempt for any conventional showbiz rituals like award shows. Kurt had a sophisticated sense of how to synthesize every aspect of rock and roll. He wrote the music and the lyrics for Nirvana. He was the lead singer and the lead guitarist. And in most bands, 2 or more members shared these responsibilities, such as Jagger and Richards and the Rolling Stones, and Plant and Page and Led Zeppelin, and other than Kurt and Jimi Hendrix, had been the only member of a superstar who did both. Kurt controlled every detail of the production of Nirvana's recordings. He personally designed the album covers and even many of the t-shirts, and came up with the ideas for the music videos. Nevermind had sold over 15 million copies, but it is not a mere commercial accomplishment that accounts for Kurt's enduring mystique, nor can a list of his musical attributes. He was an excellent guitarist, but he was also not Hendrix. His voice was uncorrupted by the artifice or the inhibition, and conveyed both a vulnerability and the power, but rock had produced many great singers. He was a compelling live performer, but others were more theatrical. He was the rare songwriter who could combine pop structure with the hard rock, but the Rolling Stones had pulled that off periodically over the years, and he was a much better lyricist than he admitted, but not at the level of Bob Dylan or Leonard Cohen. He was a moralist, but not a crusader. Kurt's admiration for the Beatles included the holistic relationship that the band, especially John Lennon, had with the mass audience. As I perceived it, Kurt redefined the entire breadth of his public life as art, including every live performance, every interview, and every photo. For all the misgivings about fame, he used it very effectively. He was one of a handful of artists in our history of rock and roll who communicated simultaneously in the multiple cultural languages, including the energy of hard rock and the integrity of punk rock, the infectious familiarity with hit songs, and the inspirational appeal of the social consciousness. In addition, during these early 90s, Kurt carried out what Allen Ginsberg, speaking of Bob Dylan decades earlier, had called the bohemian torch of enlightenment, of self-empowerment. But this misty look I see in people's eyes, the look that a kid could occupy Wall Street had, is based on something else, a unique empathy Kurt had for other people, especially outcasts. He made many of his fans feel that they were the force in the universe that accepted them. They felt that they actually knew him, and that somehow he knew them. And as I see it, the antecedent for Kurt's level of connection to the teenage angst is found not in the rock and roll canon, but in the fiction of J.D. Salinger, particularly The Catcher in the Rye. Like that classic 50s novel, Kurt's art gave dignity to the underdogs, and did so in a way that cracked the code of the mass culture so that millions could share in it. The Reagan era that had spawned his generation of punk rock is long gone, encased into amber. But 25 years after his death, Kurt's poetic, unfiltered understanding of adolescent pain still motivates young people to wear Nirvana t-shirts and to believe that they are making some kind of a statement by doing so. Kurt was much more than the sum of his demons. A drawing in his journals depicts the many moods of Kurt Cobain: baby, pissy, bully, sassy, and in those days he was still trying the various spellings of his name. In a Spin magazine piece commemorating the 20th anniversary of Kurt's death, John Norris referred to him as a punk rock pop star, hero, victim, junkie, feminist, geek avenger, wise ass. Kurt's longtime bandmate and friend Chris Novoselic reminded me recently that Kurt could be sweet and the most beautiful person, and he made the most touching, beautiful gestures to me, but Kurt could also be really mean and vicious. To me, Kurt sometimes came across as a bemused wise man from outer space, but he could also be focused control freak, as a vulnerable victim of a physical pain or a social rejection, or the duplicitous junkie, a loving father and a husband, or a kindly friend. He could be paranoid one minute and paternally self-confident next. The sensitive outsider, a self-deprecating regular guy, the quiet but powerful center of attention, a shrewd self-promoter, or a despairing man-child for whom life often seemed meaningless. Kurt conveyed a lot of feelings without talking. I have vivid memories of some of his expressions: anguished, amused, bored, pissed off, and nurturing. Those were all amplified by his piercing blue eyes. As the years have gone by, the aspects of Kurt I have been most preoccupied with his role as an artist. As a kid, his family had assumed he would be a graphic artist when he grew up, and he never stopped drawing or sculpting. However, Kurt had an acute self-awareness about the level of his visual talents. I was the best artist in Aberdeen, he told me with a rueful smile once, but I never thought that I would have stood out as an artist in a big city. Instead, the creative idiom that was his primary obsession was music, and in the realm that he knew that he could be exceptional By the time that I met Kurt, he radiated a quiet conviction about the quality of his own work, that it was validated by everyone around him, including other artists. I assume the most people reading this book are Nirvana fans. But I periodically run into people who don't get what the fuss is about. That's the nature of the music. Nothing appeals to everyone. And we all have a significant bias in favor of whatever we loved in high school. The closest thing that I can come up with in this quantitative meaning and measurement of Kurt's impact is from statistics available on the music and streaming services of Spotify, which launched in 2008, 14 years after Kurt's death. And here are the lists of the worldwide streams on Spotify, and they began as the most popular songs by Kurt's peers, as well as other artists that came right before Nirvana. The numbers as of May 8, 2018. Madonna, Material Girl, 56 million. Prince, Kiss, 80 million. NWA, Straight Outta Compton, 113. Pearl Jam, Alive, 116 million. Bruce Springsteen, Dancing in the Dark, 126 million. Soundgarden, Black Hole Sun, 139 million. Tupac, Ambitions as a Rida, 144 million. U2, With or Without You, 210 million. Foo Fighters, Everlong, 210 million. R.E.M. Losing My Religion, 229 million. Radiohead, Creep, 257 million. Dr. Dre, Still Dre, 275 million. Green Day Basket Case, 282 million. Michael Jackson, Billie Jean, 353 million. Guns N' Roses, Sweet Child of Mine, 358 million. Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit, 387 million. Just saying. The title, Serving the Servant, is a homage to a song Kurt wrote for In Utero album in the wake of Nirvana's sudden commercial triumph. It's often remembered for its first line, Teenage Angst has paid off well, a self-deprecating reflection on the massive success on the previous album. Kurt also made it clear that some of the lyrics were an attempt to clarify his relationship with his estranged father, Don, whom I had met for the first and only time at Kurt's funeral. To me, the title represents the reality of working with Kurt. He was the servant of a muse that only he could see and hear, whose energy had transmused into the language that millions could identify with. The job of us who worked with him and for him to facilitate that work to the extent that we're capable of doing so. And there's the end of the introduction. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you all over in Chapter 1.